Today, we're going to be talking about, or I'm going to be talking about content first marketing strategy. So this isn't going to be heavily focused on SEO. It is instead going to be talking a lot about how to build a content first marketing strategy that uses content, yes, for SEO to drive that top of funnel, but also throughout the entire funnel. And the reason why I am really, really passionate about this is because I've been in the content marketing industry for over a decade now, which is just insane to even say out loud. And by and large, vast majority of my content marketing teams at all of the places I've been have been 1 to 2 full-time people, typically some freelancers, variety of things. But one of the harder things to do has always been to get an investment from execs or even like even as the founder myself, right? I own a direct-to-consumer brand. And I'm like, okay, like, do I write this 2,000 word post, or do I I don't know, put some money behind some ads? Always write the post. I have a whole other talk that I could give about why that's the case. But really want to show y'all some good examples of, how I've been able to implement this, how you can ultimately use these kind of strategies to get more investment, and how you can do this with only a couple people on a team and not burn people out, which is the goal. So, there you go. I'll just click it. Cool. So I'm just going to start here, which is, what the heck has happened to content? I like to start here because I come from the journalism world. So when I first graduated college, I went into journalism, wrote for Elle.com, for Mashable, for Time Out New York, all of that jazz before ever really getting into content marketing and SEO. But this is what the internet looks like. This was just like a random search that I did. All of you are familiar with this if you've done any SEO research for any content ever before. You've landed on a page. This is Google. That looks very similar to this. So you have, e-commerce from Wikipedia, which is talking about definitions. You got Shopify talking about definitions. You got this e-commerce guide, and then the e-commerce guide, which has some really great, technical SEO and dev work happening back there to make this little drop down pop up, which really then goes into how much is e-commerce worth? Is it still growing? How many sites are there? What's the biggest e-commerce companies? Those could be entire articles themselves. And what's fascinating about each one of these articles too is for every single one of you, if you were to click on these, there's going to be a lot of words on these pages. The UX probably not going to be all of that great. Is that really what somebody's looking for when they type in e-commerce into a search term? Should they probably have been more specific? Yes, but is that what they were looking for? This, probably not. Down here, who likes to write like this, who even likes to read like this? Robots, maybe. I don't think humans actually do. And before we continue, I do want to say, I've been in this world for a really long time. I have a little bit of a confession to make, which is I feel partially responsible for the way content has ended up right now. And here's some ways or some reasons why. One, I helped make giving writers content briefs a thing. So I hear, I have a lot of, friends who are editors at a variety of different companies. And, I hear from them, they're like, yeah, I wanted to hire this writer. They were asking for XYZ amount of money. And they told me that they wouldn't even work with us if we didn't provide content briefs first. I'm like, that's mind blowing. I don't think that is the way it should be. It is helpful to have writers do their own research, content briefs, the way I describe them to my teams now. It's these are the guardrails, but dear God, write more, do more, think bigger, write for the people, not for the bots. This is kind of the box that you need to stay in, but hey, if that box over there looks prettier and better, let's go do that. Two, how I helped. I often edited, completely rewrote, and spent hours refilling in examples and redoing how-tos for writers. and then just like kept their name on it. This is because I was moving really quickly. Again, keep in mind, I only had a team of like myself often, or myself and like one other person. So we were moving really, really fast. And I just didn't ever take the time, because I didn't think I had the time to necessarily teach people or writers how to do these things, nor even necessarily negotiate like, hey, I rewrote this entire article, it should probably be under my name. I was just like, whatever, we'll put it under yours. So in other words, I haven't done a fantastic job at training writers, freelance writers, other content marketers, except for people who are like full-time on my team, how to do what was necessary. So I let people feign it, you know, and then they ended up going and writing for other people. Those editors ended up publishing it. And as a result, ultimately, I feel like I helped create this reality. Here's a little bit of proof. So these are some tips from me that circulate on the internet from time to time. They are good tips. I will say that these aren't bad ideas, but in isolation and without additional editorial context, user experience, they're just really, really bad pieces of advice. It's like giving somebody like a secret to like life change, something that's like life changing, without like helping like put into context like when to use it, how to use it, so on and so forth. So today we're going to talk a little bit about like what those additional editorial, like what that additional editorial context is, where to begin, how to think about it, and how to build a program that is ultimately sustainable. Cool. So again, what I didn't do, ultimately explain that any content I produce has to abide by at least one, there's more than one, but at least one very, very simple rule. And that's don't waste people's time. Even just listening to Alex and Bernard talking before this, or, you know, you land on a website and, you know, there's a bunch, like the whole first like 500 words of it is like, what is it? Definition. Do people like it? Is it beneficial? Like bullet points. I'm like, okay, at this point, you're just wasting my time. That was not at all what I was looking for. That is my number one rule, my number one, like, don't do in terms of writing content, which is people are moving quickly. Like I said, in my previous life, I haven't had a ton of time, or felt like I didn't have a lot of time to edit people's work and give great feedback. That's totally on me. But people are like me, very, very busy. So don't waste their time. Further, what I didn't do for a lot of those freelancers was ultimately explain that when I write or build a content strategy, I do so with an individual in mind. And I would very much encourage you to do this as well. So over at BigCommerce, so I was over at BigCommerce, I was their global editor-in-chief for about 4.5, almost 5 years. When I first inherited that blog, it was getting 30,000 sessions a month. And by the time I left, we were getting over 1 million sessions per month. What changed dramatically in that time was me beginning to write content specifically for one person. When you write and or create anything for one individual, you're ultimately creating it for many, versus if you're trying to create something for many people, you're ultimately creating it for no one. So when I was at BigCommerce, it was my Aunt Debbie, it's my family, but my Aunt Debbie, who is the CEO of our family business. It's a B2B business, sells cotton to direct-to-consumer brands. For instance, my consumer brand uses them. They are still not online. So every single article I wrote was essentially an effort to, okay, if I was going to explain how to do this to my Aunt Debbie, like how would I do it in a way that she would understand, that would make her excited, happy, so on and so forth. And then at MarketerHire, my audience over here is, myself. That's not that helpful. My colleagues or my friends, so people like Alex, more helpful. But even more specifically, there's a good friend that I have. His name's Nigel Stevens. He might even be listening to this. Maybe not though, he's over in Spain. He owns an SEO agency that is very, very successful. And he and I talk a lot about content strategy and a lot of the content out there. And I want to make sure that at my company, every single piece of content we produce, if it is something that Nigel Stevens would be like, yes, that was a good piece of content, then whew, we have done it. So again, down here, nothing gets published that doesn't enthusiastically pass the, would this person read it? Would they enjoy it? Would they get benefit from it? Would they not roll their eyes about it? Like, yes, test. And that needs to be an enthusiastic yes. But because I didn't do those things, because a lot of editors, a lot of content marketers don't do those things, we're having to grapple with the fact, that vast majority of organic searches, I can't even like read this. Okay, there it is. That the vast majority of content gets like no organic search traffic at all. There's a few reasons for that. Beyond that though, over here, we're also having to grapple with the fact that we are seeing, lower click-through rates for organic, for paid, and instead zero-click searches are more and more common because Google's, pulling those definitions and a variety of things up to the top. So in other words, content marketing not only has the industry kind of, written more and more for the bots, at least over the last 5 years at the very least, it's also getting way, way harder. Meanwhile, newsletter owned audience content is seeing a massive rise. So this is Substack only. I'll show you a screenshot here in a second when I went to look for data on this, kind of what happened. But these people, these writers who are publishing content that people are paying for, that is the content marketers should have ultimately been producing. And I'll better define that here in a second. First, again, just another view at like what the world is right now. I typed in newsletter subscriptions, long form stats, trying to find some stats. I know I've seen stats around, I just haven't bookmarked them, which I should make better notes. As a result, I didn't have them for this talk. So instead, this is what I got. Email sign up benchmarks, wasn't really looking for that. Best practices, definitely didn't type that in. Strategies, wasn't looking for that. HubSpot was helpful, but like also HubSpot like I'm a marketer, I know they're trying to sell their own stuff. So like, anyways, it's challenging to find those stats. This is the world of SEO that we live in. So what do you mean when you say, this is the content we should have been producing? And ultimately what I mean here is that good content doesn't follow a very specific template, especially a very specific template that is written for bots. You need good editors, you need that discerning eye. And then of course, the second one there is good content isn't writing and optimized for the bots only. Of course, the bots are important, right? That's top of funnel traffic. You want to, grow your organic traffic over time. That is super important. I mean, I like Ahrefs. Somebody's got to tell us how to say that soon. I use them every day, use ClearScope every single day. They're my two favorite SEO tools. Actually, might even be the only two that I use, except Keywords Everywhere, which is a plugin for Google Chrome in case you're interested. But ultimately, SEO content by and large has lost its soul. And you can tell that companies are producing content solely for the return on investment, right? They're only looking to rank highly, to get in front of those bots. And here's the challenge with that, or the downside when you do that is, one, you don't build as loyal of an audience, of an owned audience. I mean, content marketing has a million different things that it can be really helpful with. SEO is only one of them, like building brand trust, loyalty. We'll actually have a slide on that here in a second. But beyond that, none of us own Google. Google changes its algorithms often. Is there a world in which, this definition content might not work as well anymore in the future? Like, maybe. The only way to, by and large, not be the victim of a Google algorithm update is produce really great content for people, not for the bots, for people. Now, again, you want to stay within those kind of guidelines of what those bots are doing. So here we go. Content marketing is not a dollar in and dollar out business. Maybe, like a lot of people think that like paid digital might be, right? So yes, you can, and I often do, calculate the CAC and subsequent ROI of SEO efforts. More than happy to talk to people maybe like after this, because I have a very short time here to show people how to do that. Not hard, very possible, but it's really just the tip of the iceberg. So content also helps with building brand awareness and trust, building community and owned audiences so that you can send emails like all of those Substack people are. Also building connections with influencers, experts, PR folks, even building like your own personal career community, right? It's how I met Alex, how I met Nigel, a variety of, other content marketers. And then of course, what you build today in terms of content might not yield a sale for a long time, months, years. And then still they'll probably still come in a different channel. So you actually won't get attribution for it, which is just kind of the entire kind of content funnel. That said, though, not investing in content is a tragedy. So how do you do it differently? And more importantly, how do you convince, your founders, your executives, maybe even yourself, that like the devil on your shoulder, the two sides on your shoulder, how do you convince people to invest in it? So this article, this is a BigCommerce article, ranks #1 for, how to start an online business, kind of breaks everything down here. This looks a lot like those other things did, right? It's a Google search, but I'm telling you, if you click in there, it's going to be very, very different. And the reason for that is because it is full of personal stories from a variety of different brands. So in each one of these bullet points, each one of those like numbered bullet points are actually chapters of an entire guide that you can download as a PDF, or you can buy it as an actual book, physical book that will be sent to you, because it's a really long like guide on how to actually do it. In each one of these, there are personal stories from brands who have like done the exact steps that are mentioned in that chapter. In fact, I launched my own direct-to-consumer business following this guide and that chapter, and then even partnered with Skillshare to create a course on it that has 36,000 students, right? So we use this piece of content in so many different ways, but like, I'm going to break it down a little bit here to show you kind of how that came together, why I really think it's very, very different. So one, it started with interviewing customers. So that piece of content started a full year before we ever put it together. And I, hopped on calls with customers at least once a week to interview them. We turned all of those pieces of content into case studies, but I also included in those calls questions around, if you could do it all over again, how would you do it all over again? What were the biggest mistakes you made, so on and so forth, things that weren't even necessarily relevant to the case studies themselves. And then about a year later, we started building and organizing the overall outline. Again, SEO research, very important here. But we were balancing that SEO research with the insights that we had gotten from actual people. So if Google was telling us to include something in our guide that 0 of the people that I had interviewed over the past year had mentioned, it wasn't going to get included. Plain and simple, didn't seem to be relevant to the actual humans who were doing it. Cool. And then the third bullet over here is now you actually do it. So this is especially true if you're writing how-to pieces, which this piece was. We went through, me and my very, very small content team, and followed the instructions ourselves. So we made the outline and then we followed the instructions ourselves and documented the entire process, taking screenshots, all of it. Sometimes things broke in the product. We'd send that over to the product team and say, hey, this isn't working. Can't include this in our guide. Like, this is actually making it more difficult. There's a lot of feedback loops that can happen here as a result of that. But you want to go in and do it, and you want to document yourself doing it so that, when you write how to do it, you've like actually done it. It's very helpful. Number 4 over here, include stories. So that entire post is not just about me. It is a lot of it about those people that I interviewed, but a lot of what we're doing, because it's a long piece of content, right? There's a lot of different steps, a bunch of different stuff in there. So we were breaking up a ton of those different steps with actual stories from people on how they did it, why they got started, what they would have done differently, right? All that stuff that I had captured from those case studies, that whole year before, all of those additional answers. And it's like, what you're trying to do in there is, one, break up the like reading and like try to make it interesting for human beings so that they can continue reading, continue learning, continue being engaged. But you're also really trying to show people that like, this stuff's hard. Like if you are halfway through this guide and you're like, you know what, I'm going to throw the book at the wall, I don't want to do it anymore. Well, here's a story. We're going to strategically put a story there about someone who almost did that, who's like really, really happy they didn't, right? And like, here's like the mantra they like kept in mind as they were doing it, right? So like, think as you were building this out, not just about what you were trying to like rank for from that bot perspective, but think too, you know, if I was reading this, if I were going through this, what would I want to help keep me going? And then of course, finally, you got to package it up. You need to have some nice images, right? The UX of it needs to feel nice and intuitive. You should take into account that not everybody likes to read, I don't know, 15,000 words on the internet. Maybe they want to read those in a PDF. Maybe they want to get a book. Maybe they'd rather take a course. Like, how can you take a piece of content that you're producing, pull out bits and pieces and slices, and serve that content to people in a variety of different ways? Cool. And then of course, we'd do this all over again every single year. So that piece of content over at BigCommerce, when I was there, we re-released it the very first week of January every year. That is when most, like, the highest searches for how to start an online store, how to start an online business. Like, that's just the time period when people are looking. It's the new year, you have like new dreams and goals, right? So we'd re-release it then, but we'd update all the content because how to start an online store changes every year. Now, it might not have been like as intense of an update as like the very first time we wrote it, but it still took us months to put together. We'd get all new images, we'd get all new stories, include new case studies. We'd, you know, rewrite things like taxes change a lot, and like how to set up taxes is just like so annoying and frustrating for e-commerce businesses. I'm still frustrated about it as a business owner. Finally got myself a good accountant. Highly recommend that. But you have to update a bunch of stuff because the internet changes a lot. Your content needs to change to reflect that. Okay, cool. So that one's good, nice, beautiful, but this one here is my favorite example. So BigCommerce, you know, is a decently large organization, and about 6 months before the company released its headless commerce, you know, like strategy, I suppose, or like its app that it was gonna, you know, have for WordPress. My team got word of it. And we had gotten word of it, you know, because we had worked closely with the product team for a while. We asked them always to let us know at least 6 months before, if not prior. And the very first thing we did when we found out that was going to happen was we published a long form piece of content on what the heck is headless commerce. So like, what is headless commerce? Actually goes like hand in hand with one of the slides that you saw in the last presentation, where, you know, as a topic is becoming like known, you kind of start with that what is, and then you talk about the benefits, right? That like arrow that was shown. So that's what this long form piece of content did. Said, you know, what is it? What are the benefits? Who's using it? So on and so forth. And it was completely not salesy, right? As good content usually isn't. But BigCommerce didn't have anything to sell, right? One, I was really interested in it. Two, we knew we had something coming down the pike in about, you know, 6 months or so. And then of course, over those 6 months, we continued publishing content about once a month or so on headless commerce. So we started talking about, you know, content in commerce and how that was kind of transforming into headless commerce. That's the history of it, right? Like, how do we even get here? We started interviewing folks who were publishing a ton of content already on WordPress, but using sites like BigCommerce or even Shopify to like still sell. And it's like, okay, like, what are the frustrations there? Like, how could this be made easier? And started publishing content there. All of that to say, by the time that we actually launched Headless Commerce in December of that year, BigCommerce was ranking #1 for headless commerce, just as a term in general. And the reason for that is because 6 months prior, we started publishing content on it. So this is how you get content. Like this is a true content first marketing strategy, where you start with that long form piece of content. You were writing from a curiosity standpoint to really understand it. You can then use that content to educate internal team members, to write emails, to break things down into, you know, one-pagers, to convert people in a variety of different things. Don't worry, we're going to talk about all of this. So cool. So how did this work? It was the most successful launch in BigCommerce history, at least at the time. I don't want to take credit for anything they've done since. But one, really, really close partnership with the product marketing team. So again, we ask them to let us know of any products coming down the pike at least 6 months in advance, ideally even before that, just so we could start working on content, right? And our promise to them was, we're not going to tell anybody we're going to do anything with this term or with this idea, right? We want to educate the market on it. Cool. Number 2 is that close partnership with customers. So the moment my team found out that we were going to be doing this headless commerce stuff, we started reaching out to all the customers we had ever talked to who had like really great content in general, right? They were big believers in content. They were doing this content and commerce thing, and hopped on the phone with them to understand more, how is it working? What could be better? So on and so forth, which really helped us better understand this upcoming trend of headless commerce anyways. Number 3 over here is, write a report, show your curiosity. So again, I come from a journalism background, but I think, any writer or editor can really do this, which is, I really wanted to learn more about headless commerce. The definitions I came up with were definitions that I had thought up based on what I had learned about it, right? So trying to write for a non-technical audience to ultimately explain this like rather technical thing. It's like all about APIs and decoupling of like a layer, like who cares? You just like want it to work. Anyways, so write a report, show your curiosity. If you would not read through your own content, nobody else will. This is similar to that, how to sell online piece. Break the content up, tell stories in it, like do whatever solves for your own curiosity. Number 4, of course, is ask for feedback. So once that content was written, we shared it with customers, we shared it with partners, we shared it with other experts. Anybody, right? Because technically I wasn't an expert, my team wasn't an expert, right? Like we needed that feedback, and that feedback came back in terms of editorial, so on and so forth, but also in like how to kind of restructure. And then of course think in a hub and spoke model, which is we publish that one long form piece of content and then publish 6 additional pieces of content over those 6 months to help support it. Now, those pieces of content didn't ultimately end up ranking for headless commerce as that main term. They ended up ranking for longer tail keyword searches, but they ultimately helped kind of prop that one up so that by the time we launched a press release and these major case studies, so on and so forth, we were already getting a lot of really great organic traffic as a result. So those are 2 examples of a content first strategy that you can then use across the entire funnel. I know I'm going so fast here, y'all. There's only 20 minutes to talk about it all. And you will get these slides after as well. So this is how you think about it. I'm going to walk through each one of these starting from the bottom up, but you want to start by making sure somebody is always talking to customers as well as other internal teams, creating content that feeds your own curiosity. If you don't care about it, nobody will. If you want to read it, nobody would. Tell other people's stories and share their ideas too. You never want to be talking in a bubble because again, nobody cares. Make it pretty easy to read, personable, and then reuse it everywhere, specifically lower in the funnel once your content team in particular really becomes an expert on that topic and can begin to educate the entire company and as a result, customers. Cool. So talk to customers and internal teams. I myself have always been the person who has done the case study interview calls. Again, that's like 1 per week. You see this on the internet all the time in like the marketing Twitter threads where people are like, talk to your customers. Like, yeah, yes, definitely talk to your customers. But talk to your customers in such a way that you can kind of get something out of that, right? It's not necessarily just about collecting feedback, though that is really important and you can do that in case study calls. But I've always used case study calls as a way, 1, to get a really great case study and testimonial, 2, find out what could be better about our platform, and 3, ask questions for content I know I'm going to be creating later, right? What were the biggest pain points, variety of different things. If it's not you doing it, I always like to have my senior most editor doing the case study calls, and that is because they're editing all pieces of content that go live across the website and email, a variety of different places, and they will know as a result of talking to customers what those biggest pain points are, really how to begin to shape words and phrases and a variety of things to make sure that we are talking appropriately to that end customer and linking back. Cool. Great content that feeds your own curiosity, or at least that of your target reader. So Be sure, again, to have one person in mind that you are writing for when you finish writing a piece of content and editing it, because like the first draft, always not great. So definitely edit it. If that piece of content, like that piece of content needs to pass that test, right? That enthusiastic yes test, that one person you are writing for would be like, yes, this is really good. This is really helpful. I want to roll my eyes at it. Cool. Tell other people's stories and share their ideas too. So be sure to include quotes from experts. Be sure to include quotes from customers. You never want to be producing a piece of content that only has your thoughts and insights in it, right? So I do have this rule of 3 in all of my content, or all of the content that my team produces, that we need at least 3 quotes, at least 3. Ideally, we have far more, but at least 3 quotes and insights from other people before we publish it, because otherwise, who cares? We're talking to ourselves. We're probably promoting something that nobody else cared about, right? If something is popular, if something is good, if something is beneficial, then you should be able to find other people to chat with. This will also grow your own, community as well. It also really helps with distribution, because once that piece goes live, you can reach out to those people. They'll help share it. Go make it pretty easy to read and personable. So 1, if you work at a B2B tech company, your sales team is already going to ask you to do this. They're going to probably want a lot of these pieces of content in 1-pagers that are pretty nice to read. So like, do the work ahead of time to make it easy to pull really nice looking hero images, to maybe, mimic some of the UX that's already happening on the website. You do want to make, custom images. I like to remake graphs and then properly cite those graphs on those graphs themselves, as well as linking back in the article. But you want to make it look cohesive, right? You want to show that beyond the content itself, you've really put time into thinking about, how you can help tell this story in a visual way beyond the words themselves. Cool. And then reuse everywhere. Of course, that means distribution. Yes, you want to distribute on your social channels, so on and so forth. But once you have a really good piece of content like this out there, think about how you can break that content down for landing pages, or even link to it from landing pages on your site. How could you break that down for, paid digital content pages? So typically things that work better in that context are like listicle types. And so it's like, okay, instead of like, what is headless commerce? Maybe it's 7 benefits of headless commerce, or whatever it might be. That could make a good blog post, but a lot of times it's kind of bucketed underneath that like longer post. You can repurpose that and use that there. How could you share this in email, right? Or what 1-pagers might you be able to pull out of it in design so that you can send, very specific emails to very specific segments of your audience in order to build trust, to get them to move further into a different life cycle stage, so on and so forth. So don't just publish that piece of content for the web. Don't just be thinking about it from that SEO perspective. Once it is live, you now want to take all different aspects of that content and repurpose it through and down the funnel. This is going to make your life so much easier, because this is what I've done with teams of 2 and organizations, like at multiple organizations. But it's also ultimately how you help people, like how you help convince people that content is useful beyond SEO, right? It's hard for execs, founders, maybe even yourself, to accept, that common, I guess, measurement of time in which, okay, once you get, an article out, once you start working on SEO, you're not going to see results for like 3 to 6 months, or big results for 3 to 6 months. Reusing content everywhere helps you skip that a little bit, where you can start seeing results from content, maybe not from the SEO side of it, but from content far sooner than that. Cool. So this is just a little bit of a wrap up of everything I just said, which is by and large, I've only had tops 2 people on my teams when doing this. I do often use freelancers as well. Again, start with customer case studies, talk to those customers, take good notes. After you ask, maybe some of those more case study questions, be sure to have some additional questions, you want to ask just around things that are relevant to your industry, right? This is also really good and helpful too for building real personal relationships with customers beyond that like transactional kind of case study call. Interview experts, of course. So like continue to build that kind of community around you. And of course, you're going to need those pieces of content or those quotes for your content anyway. Create content that clearly feeds your own curiosity. In other words, make it interesting, make it fun to read, tell personal stories in it, tell the stories of other people in it. Remember, you were writing for the humans. You want to have that kind of SEO box, but then you want to write for people who are actually going to read it, not just for the bots who are indexing it. And then of course, make it look nice, make it easy to read. And of course, think about, all the different ways that people digest information. So maybe you write a really long piece on how to start an online business, and maybe some people would rather get like an email or an SMS message every week with like a 5-minute to do for that week, right? I don't know. I'm just making that up. But some people might like that rather than taking an hour-long course or reading like 15,000 words or buying a book or whatever it might be. Ultimately, though, content marketing is not just about SEO. It's really important. I love SEO. I love playing that game. But as a content marketer, especially over the last decade, I've learned very, very quickly that in order to get the investment that you want and to really make that content work for you beyond distribution at the top of the funnel, which is what a bunch of people talk about, beyond, SEO and trying to get all of those results, you really, really got to think about, okay, how am I now, once this piece is live, going to use this content to educate my existing people in the funnel, to educate my sales team, to educate my internal team. Why does this matter? And if the answer by and large is that it doesn't, then you've probably created the wrong piece of content.